ESP starting today. Trademark. I think that is the way that you diversify risk. Because
And how do I do it in a way that honors the investment of blood, sweat, and tears?
Are we considered geriatric millennials? Is that what we're
You know what? Legacy building mode, right? Like what?
What's going on, everybody? Mike Grimberg, Garrio Harrison here. We are back after extended hiatus of Marketing Adjacent, and we're coming at you with a slightly different episode format. We're going to go much, much shorter, and we're going to talk about one specific topic, and that'll be it. And we're going to do this. We're going to start weekly, and we might switch to multiple times a week and daily. We'll see how it goes, but there's always lots of stuff going on. So, yeah.
Well, see,
exciting stuff.
This is what it's about, man. Iteration, content iteration.
There you go. There you go. Content iteration. So we figured we'd start with something fun and interesting today. The topic here is country-specific TLDs. So top-level domains, for those that don't know. There's some really, there's an interesting thing happening right now. It's the island nation of Anguilla, I believe, is getting a ton of money right now from the AI craze. So the .ai domains, for those that don't know, the way this all works is, I'm not going to go through the whole how the domain name registries work and whatnot, but at a basic level, there are kind of your regular top level domains like the .coms, .nets, etc. They're managed by ICANN, I believe. And then everything else goes through their individual registrars, that manage individual country specific domains. So like .us, .uk, .cn for China, etc. Those make sense. A lot of like websites that operate in a specific country want to own those. Things like that. .de is pretty popular for Germany. But then you have these like tiny countries like Anguilla that have like, I don't know what their population is, to be honest, but it's small. And they make millions. There's an article out there that I saw that said I think they're slated to make somewhere in the ballpark of like 25 to 30 million in the coming year from everybody who wants a .ai domain. So when somebody purchases a .ai domain, there's a fee that goes to the country that owns said domain extension. The fun thing is, I did a little bit of research. I knew about one of these, but there's a bunch of these examples through recent history of tiny countries, relatively unknown, that make a bunch of money with this. The ones I knew about were the .li. So for those of you who remember, like in the, I think like early 2000s, the .li craze. So like Bitly and I forget that there's some other big name domains out there that use the .li ending. Well, that's Libya, for those that don't know. And the interesting, this one I knew about. So they're when they under Gaddafi back in, I think it was 2012. I forget the year exactly, but the war-torn country, etc. And they shut down their internet for I forget how long. And what people didn't realize, when that happens, that means the domain registrars can't access the data from the country-specific domains. And after a certain time, that means all those sites go bye-bye. So like that's an interesting thing of like when you're selecting your domain name, not just your name, but the TLD. Like most people don't even think about, well, is this country safe? The other thing that happened is like this one wasn't as popular, but the .sy domains, that's Syria. Syria had sanctions placed against them during the maybe still does, I think. I don't even know, to be honest with you. I didn't research into that before we jumped on, but they, when the sanctions happened, anybody that had a .sy domain pretty much was in breach of sanctions. So if you're a US company that had a .sy domain for whatever reason, you could no longer keep that domain. So you have to switch to something else. So like it gets us into sort of how interconnected our world is from a business perspective. And like, again, people generally wouldn't think of it. So anyway, I thought that was absolutely fascinating. You know, and people are, I was watching somebody post this on LinkedIn and like, oh my God, this is crazy. But the reality is this has been happening for decades of this kind of thing. Like this wasn't the first one. The other one I found was like a tiny island nation in the South Pacific called Tuvalu, I think. I don't even know how to pronounce it, to be honest. That's .tv. Everybody remember like Justin.tv, and then like a bunch of media companies bought .tv domains. Like they made, like over the decades, I forget the exact number, but they're making roughly $1 million a year from that.
Yeah, we should try and find some articles and like throw it in the comments for this as well, because I think those are definitely interesting to look into. Like that the one from Fortune that you sent, like I did not realize that was the case, and it is 30 million that they're
and that's just for the year.
Yeah,
right, which makes sense based on how rapidly the industry is exploding. Everybody that has anything to do with AI wants a .ai domain.
Right. So I guess, here's my question for you on, on this. Like, we've talked about AI kind of in general, but this starts to get into a lot of infrastructure type things that people kind of don't realize or take for granted, right? Like even that point that you mentioned of a country being sanctioned and it taking down all these domains. So if when you hear that and you think about these exotic domains, like what should, in the spirit of being marketing adjacent, like what should marketers be thinking about? Do we need to start thinking that like 2 levels deeper into any sort of initiative?
100%, especially if you consider a lot of these domains are being like people are sitting on these to sell them, right? So I guarantee you, again, I didn't have time to do the research, but I would not be surprised if there are a bunch of part domains, part.ai domains that people are sitting on. Now, I don't know enough about the country of Anguilla. I don't like what does happen if Anguilla all of a sudden goes through a civil war or a hurricane rips through and completely knocks out their internet or something, like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like all of these things, like the servers are, I believe, have to be local for this. So because it's I think, don't quote me on that, right? So all these types of things you have to be thinking about when if you're going to spend $100,000 to buy your desired .ai domain, for example, and then if you're, I'm sure this isn't the last one. Again, I'm sure there are companies right now that are buying .ly domains still. If you're going to do that, well, you should know that this is Libya you're talking about, and it's been, and unfortunately, probably for the near to medium term, will be a war-torn country. So what happens the next time they shut down their internet? Maybe it's for a long enough period where it does completely shut down all your website. All those types of things.
So I guess, zooming out even a step further, like, do you think that domains are like as precious as they used to be? Right? Because you're still trying to find the .com for what you're looking for. .co, became kind of a nice substitute. .net is still out there, still floating around, but I guess the question is, to get some of these exotic domains for your startup, or your company's initiative, is it still worth the capital expenditure to go get that perfect domain Um, is it for branding purposes? Is there like technical infrastructure reasons why you would need it? Like what?
I definitely don't think there are any
Why is
technical
this an issue?
infrastructure reasons.
Was that
I don't like, I mean, a domain is a domain from an infrastructure perspective.
right?
Actually, for that matter, I would say from a infrastructure perspective, again, that gets back to like the safe bet is a .com or any sort of safe place, if you will. That's not a, because with any TLD, at the end of the day, you have some level of risk of geopolitics involved.
Right.
Even whatever. Again, do I think anything is going to happen with the .uk domains? No, but .cn, for example, yeah. Now,
Mhm,
.cn doesn't have any um, other than unless you're operating in China that you want that.
mhm,
I don't see value in it there of doing that. Like they're unlike a .ai or a .me or a .io is another popular one. I
mhm,
forget that was a weird one. That's like a British uh, island territory, whatever, something like that. Those are popular back in like the late '90s, early 2000s too. Um, but I think there's definitely a branding plan. I mean, I can't remember. I thought I saw um, uh, the co-founder of HubSpot recently purchased chat.com, I believe it was. Or was it chat.ai? I can't remember.
right.
For
Yeah,
like an
yeah.
ungodly money. I can't remember how much they paid for it. I think he shared
Darth
it.
Darmish. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
I think
remember
that's
seeing
worth
that.
it. I know
We
one
should
of I know um one of my favorite companies that's unfortunately shutting down right now is Gated. They bought gated.com. And like that was I mean, right now you could argue, well, since the company's shutting down, was that a worthwhile investment? Maybe, maybe not. But I think as you're planning it, I think it was. Like I think it totally makes sense from a branding perspective.
yeah, I guess, and maybe it's because we're starting to see more intention put on where capital goes um, in the life cycle of an organization, right? And I'm thinking it's primarily of like venture backed startups here, right? If you're choosing a domain and you have X amount of dollars, how much realistically should you be investing in the perfect domain? Because this sets the trajectory of your entire marketing budget going forward. And does this start to have diminishing returns if you start to view it through that lens?
I really wish it's a great question. I wish I had the data. I would assume maybe someone's done the research, but my immediate thought on this is, especially if you're a tech company and
Mm-hmm.
your domain is your product, you should invest. And for that matter, if you think whatever, if I think the decision you have to make is, I'm going to make this up. Like, let's take the gated example. And again, I don't know this for a fact. I haven't talked to Andy about this in particular, but um, if the choice was, do I spend, and I forget, I think he talked about how much they spent, but either way, like, I'm going to make this up. If your choice was, do I spend $100,000 on gated.com
Mm-hmm.
or do I choose gated.net for free? To me, it's not even a question,
Right.
honestly, because nobody, like, if you hear the company gated and you want to type it in, you're going to type in .com. You're never going to think about .net or .info or whatever. Maybe .ai, right? At that point would have been, or .io. Like those are interesting, but even then, like most people just automatically revert to .com. And I think
Right.
I don't think it matters from an SEO perspective, for example, but I think from a branding perspective, it is totally worth it. If you're the question then becomes, if you're like I don't know, make this up, like a consulting firm or a manufacturing company,
Mm-hmm.
and consulting firm probably doesn't make sense. It's unlikely that your company name is not available unless you really
Mm-hmm.
screwed something up, I think. But like take manufacturing company, I don't know. I think the same thing, right? I think findability, if you will, I think is critical. And if somebody is whatever seeing your ads out there, whatnot, doesn't click through, but then goes and searches for you, sure, Google will highlight the right one, I think. But what if there's again, this is where you think about, well, is there a competing brand name? Like there's a whatever gated.com and a gated.net, and they're different, completely different products. So it's not a trademark violation or whatever, completely different industries. That's a big problem.
Right. I can definitely see it on the SaaS side of things, right? Like if you're not responsible, if the brand of the product is the actual domain and the usage of it is the actual domain, that's one thing, right? But if you're a company that sells a product or even consulting, now that starts to have diminishing returns because you start to, if I'm going to find you, you should be being proactive in reaching out to me and connecting to the domain. Yes, I need to know where to go find additional information and do the research on my own, but your external sales team should be guiding people to that deal. Like I don't think anybody's going to type in threads.com and go, wait a minute, where is threads, right? They they know that they're probably going to end up going to it from the app itself, right? Or they know that it's going to be this .net domain. They'll know that because of repetitive use. So it makes sense to do it on that side. But yeah, and again, this is probably goes back to some of the conversations we used to have or we had earlier about how much do you invest in something like a brand in the early days, and at what point does it start to, the ROI is just not there. And I think
Yeah.
that
I mean,
that's a very good question with this particular like conversation, right?
I mean, is it helpful? I had to do it. No, I think it's a good question. I think I think you have to look at it on an individual basis in terms of what's available, right?
Mhm,
So I think there are a lot of, I don't know, in my mind, there are a lot of factors you have to consider. Are you already a mature brand? So like you mentioned Threads.
mhm,
Everybody knows Meta and Facebook, et cetera. Like, and they have such a robust user base. And again, and people are going to use the app, so the domain doesn't matter as much. But if you're
mhm,
a startup and you're an unknown, if you're starting a new category, for example,
mhm.
and you want a category based domain that someone's parked on, I don't think you have an option. I think you figure out a way to buy the damn thing. Now, of course, I think there's like, if you're a bootstrap startup and somebody that's parked on it and whatever you're sitting on, I don't know, something that's incredibly, in theory, incredibly valuable. You know, again, take like gated.com as an example. Again, I have no idea how much they
Yeah,
actually paid for it. But if that person said, well, you have to pay me $10 million, then it's like, yeah, I don't know, obviously.
right.
But I don't think let's assume you just you raised I don't know, a $10 million round. You're not going to spend your entire Series A, which I mean, $10 million for Series A is not terribly typical, but whatever,
Yeah,
right? Like you're not going to spend your entire series, capital raise on a domain, right? Like that's just nuts.
right.
Um, so I think maturity level of the organization, is it a new product within an existing category or brand new category? What's your capital structure?
Mhm.
Are you app based versus web based? I think that makes a difference. There are all these factors that you have to take into consideration of how much are you willing to and what you should invest in. And then the last one I think in my mind is, well, what's available, right? So I don't know,
Right.
like for example with Gated. For those who don't know, Gated was a way to like pretty much block, if you will, your inbox from unwanted, outbound spam. So Could you have gone instead of gated.com to gatedemail.com or gatedinbox.com if
Mm,
that was available for free or for significantly less expensive? Then yeah, maybe that would have made more sense. Sure, it's
mhm.
longer, but I think it's more descriptive and maybe even makes more sense. I don't know. It's like I'm making this up. It's just simply an
Yeah,
example. I have no idea what was available to them at the time. So I think it has to be very situational. I don't know.
that's interesting. There's, the other side of this coin, as we're talking, there's two things that are popping in my head. So the whole concept that we've been talking about of generational, right? So if you're a company and you're spending that much money on a domain today, who is your future audience 5, 10 years from now, right? And will they be searching for and looking for your product or service from a path to purchase standpoint, um, on that domain, right? I think of uh, yeah, .com is the thing that people know, and we're trained to go look for that, right? But that's our generation, right? Like millennium, that's kind of how we learn to search. But I look at like our kids, like they search completely differently, right? And generative AI, to loop that back in here, the way that they search is going to be completely different, right? And you look at something like even restaurant reviews, right? Like before, we would go to Yelp and we'd read the reviews, and then we'd go to Google and we'd do a search for the if you're looking for a brand new restaurant, and I saw an article that Google was nervous because people are starting to search TikTok for um, for information, right? Because again, there's so much content on the internet that we start to trust creators and individuals more. Um, and they were worried that people are starting to search that way, right? YouTube, yes, and so on. But for the first time yesterday, I was at a networking event, um, and I was talking with a guy, and he was talking about how him and his wife search for restaurants. And he doesn't have a TikTok account, right? But she will go to TikTok and search for the restaurant, which I didn't even know that you could do this, and see what people say about the restaurant, where, what to try, what kind of drinks to order, when to go, what not to order. Like people are doing these things in reviews, and I think as the internet continues to evolve and change, and you know the way that we find and interact with information with all this generative AI stuff that's out there, like does that change fundamentally the purpose of a website going forward? And if so, where's the value? Right? Like if you have $100,000, where do you spend that $100,000? Is it in marketing to drive traffic to your website, even if it's a funky domain? Is it in creating tools and features that create a feedback loop that get people coming back to your website? Or is it the brand alignment name that you do? Like the dollar is finite, right? So where do you make the investment? And I think when I read the article, the first thing that popped into my mind is, wow, if these branding agencies that are spending that their whole value proposition is we will help you find the perfect name and the brand and the URLs and the trademark and protection and so on, like that value starts to diminish. And then what's coming next? And I don't think we know what's coming next, but something's changing.
That's interesting. I don't know that the value of the brand name starts to diminish. The question is, what are the elements that need to be associated with it? So
No,
I
no,
think I
no.
think the point
Not
around
not the brand name, the service of going through all those things is what I'm talking about.
yeah, I mean what we know is brand or branding activity as a whole has a ton of value. It's hard to prove,
Mhm.
but it's there, and you can prove it through things like media mix modeling, etc. I know we're going way outside of where we started, but I think I do agree with you in, and again, this gets back to, I think you have to look at it on an individual basis.
Hmm.
Because again, for one company, it might be totally worthwhile to spend the 100 grand there. For another one, it's not a complete waste of money, maybe, but it's a waste.
Hmm.
Again, I think looking at how is it used and what you're describing actually made me think, like, even in our own family, Gabby all the time sends me like Instagram reels or whatever stuff, like, oh, we should do these things around Phoenix and we should go to these restaurants. And me, I'm like, I'm searching Google Maps and
Yeah.
other stuff. So I think everyone's got different things, but I think going back to the domain example, I think there's also it's almost like a de-risking exercise of, if you're serious about whatever your project is, you're likely not just buying one domain, you're buying 5 to 10.
Hmm.
Some of them are inexpensive because they're not taken by anybody, and some of them are going to be expensive, and one of them is going to be your core domain.
Hmm.
But I think there's an incredible risk to only buy and say like the .com and not maybe buying the .ly version if you have a .ly brand name, for example.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? So you might not want your main domain to be whatever. I'll make this up, like Contently. I'm pretty sure that's a company. I don't even know. But you might want contently.com to be your main one, but you better still be buying the .ly domain. Even if
Yeah.
that's the one that's parked down, that's going to cost you 10 grand.
Yeah.
Just say, because I think there's an incredible risk to having something else either pop up there. It could be a competitor even, right? Like something stop. I mean, that's more of a trademark thing and there's a bunch of stuff, but do you really want to be going through the legal battle of that? And instead,
Right.
like, that's probably going to cost you more than the 10 grand that'll cost you to buy the domain. So I think you have to think about business as a whole. What's this going to cost you? And if you don't do it, you're likely going to have a legal battle on your hands from a trademark perspective that's going to inevitably cost you, 5 to 10 grand in legal fees or whatever it is. So you might as well just
Right.
bite that bullet up front.
And there's also like the risk of, as you're talking about that, the risk of like nefarious actors too, right? Like
Yep.
everybody's gotten one of those emails like from
Yep.
facebooksecurity.gmail.com, right? You're like,
Yep.
okay, you know what I mean? So um, there's definitely value in going through the exercise of
Mhm.
thinking it all the way through. But just like with any good strategic plan or, you know, I'm constantly preaching this idea of fiscal discipline being like a thing now, like map it out, put the cost down on paper, and then have a rigorous cost benefit analysis discussion with your leadership team to go, do we spend these dollars? Because until you actually cut the check, it's an intellectual exercise, and
Mhm.
it's an important one to have. So yeah, like it's definitely worth it for sure.
Yeah. No, I didn't even think about the cybersecurity example, and I totally agree with you on this. The last thing I'll say before we wrap, another interesting example. I forgot. I didn't know, but so everybody probably remembers like the .me domains in.
Oh yeah, yep,
So that brought in, at least the article I looked at, which was fairly old. So I'm sure it's way more than that, but it brought in um, I think over $15 million to Montenegro when Montenegro became a country back in like '98 or whatever it is.
yep,
So I just find this kind of stuff fascinating.
yeah. I still have my .me account from Apple,
Oh yeah,
from iCloud.
yep.
Yeah,
There you go. That's
yeah.
right. I think
So
that's a good place to stop. Everybody that's listening, we're going to be doing this more often. Follow us, like us, leave a review on wherever you listen and watch, and we will see you all soon.
all right, I feel like we should do more of these.